folks, once again, welcome back to my basement boatyard. This is Captain Boat Builder here, saying we're on to episode number 2 in the Trimaran conversion of the Viola 14. And I'm going to call this episode Bahama. And the only reason for that silly little name is I'd like to be in the Bahamas right now because it's kind of cold and damp here in the southeast. The Bahamas are nice. So here we go with Bahama. What you're looking at is the line drawing of the Viola 14, and you can see how everything is positioned relative to the dagger board and the mast, and the sail, of course, and that's where most of the balance comes. And the way the boat sails right now, thanks to Michael Storer, it is perfectly balanced. But I was quite concerned about positioning the amas fore and aft and how high they should be above the water or at the water line, and also the positioning of the akas. So we go from this picture, the line drawing of the boat from the side, and we go right to this picture. And this was done by John Harris at Chesapeake Lightcraft. And what you can see is that he has superimposed the ama from his sail kit. You can see there's the bow of the ama just a little bit higher than the deck of the Viola 14. Here's the stern of the ama, right at about the deck level. And that little square right there, that's the forward aka. That's the fore and aft placement of that. This is the aft aka, the fore and aft placement of that, to get the correct pitch, bow up or bow down, in the ama itself. And then the last piece of the puzzle is this little dimension right here, 5 3/8 inches. And that's the distance between the bottom of the boat, the very bottom of the Viola 14, and the bottom of the ama. And I'll be testing this, but that's supposed to give just exactly the right up and down on the amas so that they are not too high, which would make the boat flop around, and they're not too low, which would prevent any heeling at all. So this is what I'm working on, and there'll be more of this later in the video presentation. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. It's a continuation of what we've been doing before, because I'm still working on the amas, still getting ready for paint and varnish. So once again, Bahama ama. I'm not sure that it was absolutely necessary, but I did a dry fit here on the shear clamps, starting from this corner right here. You can see there's a slight angle. And because of the curve, it's going to be a little bit longer. So I dry fit it all the way down to the end, and I mark the end right here. So now I know that it will be long enough when you take the whole curve into account. And again, I'm just dry fitting the shear clamp here before I start cutting and tapering. Cut all 4 of the shear clamps so that they're exactly the same size. So now I'm working on the tapering of the shear clamps. Here's the instructions from the book, from the manual. It shows right here a technique using a string from the opposite stem to mark a line and cut them. But you can see what you need to wind up with is pretty narrow pieces, because it's going to taper right to a very pointed bow and stern. I decided that I'd just use this little hand plane and plane them down. And this is about 7 inches. It's about 7 inches, and I looked at some videos and I tried to get proportions looking at other pieces. And I think this is going to be close enough. I may have to work on it just a little bit when I put this hulls together. But it doesn't really matter. The fit doesn't have to be perfect, because these ends are going to be all full of thickened epoxy to fill in the gaps and make it extra strong. So this is a way that you can taper these things down just using a hand plane. Well, I've got the first shear clamp on, and as you can see from this picture, this is a pretty clamp intensive exercise. It took this many clamps just to hold the curve. And I've got the curve just where I want it because there's so many clamps that I can easily use my finger right here to see that the shear clamp, this top edge, this is going to be the top edge of the shear clamp, and the plank are exactly the same, so that there's minimal sanding required. But unfortunately, this process is going to take me 4 days because I've just about run out of clamps. And so I'll just be setting these up 1 day at a time. But it worked out quite well. This is different than what's in the instruction manual. But I like doing it this way because I can get the shear clamp exactly in line with the top edge of the plank. And so, like right here, your finger is very sensitive. You can just feel that it's perfectly lined up. And that way, the deck piece will lay on just perfectly, and we'll have a really nice seam that's going to run the whole length of the AMA, and it should mostly be varnished and epoxied. So this is the end of the first shear clamp, and I do more, but I don't have enough clamps. So I'll be back. This may seem way too basic, but I just wanted to include this because I have made mistakes in the past, and I wanted to point out that these 4 panels are identical, and they are the 4 panels that form the bottom of the 2 AMAs. And these 4 panels are also identical, and they're the panels that form the top panels of the AMAs. The AMAs are identical, but the point that I wanted to make is that I can see how someone, myself probably, could glue the shear clamp onto the wrong side. These definitely have a left side and a right side. So you can see I've got this thing elevated to remind me. This is one side. When I bring the identical panel up, the shear clamp has to be glued here so that they meet. It would be easy to make a mistake and glue it on the wrong side. So I've done this just as a reminder of which is left and which is right, because each has a left and a right side. Just be careful you glue the shear clamp on the correct side for each panel. So I made these stands to hold the hulls, to hold the AMAs while I'm working on them. And the shape of the stands is roughly the same shape as the shape of the AMAs. I'm going to be putting carpet in here right along the inside, and I'll be able to use various thicknesses of carpet to try and get a better fit. And actually, I'm not sure that they need to fit especially well, but this is just to hold the hulls in an upright position while I'm working on them. Now I have all 4 lower bottom pieces. These are the lower bottom planks for the left AMA and the right AMA. And I've got them set up just in a temporary setup. All these bulkheads still need to be carefully fitted, and they're not in the right position, but it's just temporary. But I did want to show you here what I've done with the tapering as it comes to a point. And you can see here how far back I've had to taper it. This is probably going to be filled up with glue. But what I was trying to get was, I was trying to get a really nice fit right here. I may have to actually work on this a little bit more so that the leading edge of the bow and the stern will be nice and symmetrical. Here's the other one. You can see how much sanding I've had to do. This is hours and hours of sanding to get them to fit just right. And I'm not sure that it's all that important. But what I have come to realize is that the bow sections are very sharp, and maybe they'll even be a little bit on the fragile side. Bear in mind that this part right here, this is where the lower plank is going to go back and curve like this. So the bow is going to be about twice that high, but it's still going to be quite pointed. So it's just a lot of sanding and refitting and dry fitting and back and forth and back and forth. Again, I like doing this. Sometimes I'm not quite sure why. One of the things I realized in rereading the directions, I just keep reading them over and over again. They recommend that after, and this is the timing thing that has me a little confused, but after the hull sections are all connected and you've got the hull pretty much finished, except for some slight adjustments, they suggest that you put unthickened epoxy, just one coat, on the inside to seal it against moisture. Great idea, even though these should be airtight and watertight when you finish them. But what I realized is once you get this glued together, up especially in the bow section, it's going to be very, very difficult to get a brush in there and get some epoxy on. And also here, underneath this little piece of wood, the shear clamp, it's going to be very hard to get the epoxy back in here. So what I've decided to do is I've decided to pre-coat before I put this all together, and that way I can get the epoxy in here and on this side of the shear clamp without any problems, and also up into the bow sections. So you might want to think about where you're going to pre-coat before you put all this together, bearing in mind that once the epoxy sets up, you won't get a very good bond with the paste that you're using to hold everything together. So my thought is I'm really only going to do about this much. This would be epoxy right here. This would be bare so that the paste in the joint will stick, and then it's easy to get down in the middle. It's just up under this edge and in the pointed part of the bow. That's where it's difficult to get the epoxy after. Folks, I just wanted to mention with this riveting presentation, if you've been able to stay awake and if you've been paying a little bit of attention, I think you'll notice that I made a mistake. I identified these 4 planks as the bottom planks. And in fact, these are the planks that go around the top. And of course you can tell that because this is the shear clamp right here. That's what the deck sits on. So I've incorrectly identified these as the bottom planks, and they're actually the top. So folks, that's about it for today. Of course, there will be much more work on the AMAs, and just a little teaser as we go forward. If you look right here, where my finger is, you can see the thin strip of fiberglass tape that I have put all along the bottom edge for reinforcement, and there'll be more on that later. So once again, thanks for watching. So long.